Hello and welcome to Nintendo Agenda again, here with Dr. Gackman. This is actually going to be a slideshow of a video, something for you to watch. Previous videos that I've made would just be one static picture and more like a vlog format. But this, I actually want to show you some stuff. We're going to go through some size comparisons, some ideas, patents, and then we're going to end it with what I think the next system, the successor to Switch, will look like, how it will function, and its logo and its name. So let's start. This is just a Switch OLED, just a normal size. I'm going to go through this, and here it is with the 8-inch screen, which is about 14% bigger. Now, at first, I was thinking to myself that the Joy-Cons, in order to have like universal backwards compatibility with the previous or the current generation's Joy-Cons, that the rails would be the same, the sizes would be the same. And I thought about different positions, like they could click all the way to the bottom, all the way to the top, or in the center here. There's, I was kind of against the idea of having different size Joy-Cons, because then, you would have to get new grips, new, chargers, but that probably might be the goal is to make more money to get you to buy more stuff. And as far as backwards compatibility, you could probably still, with this idea that I'm presenting, you could probably still use the current Joy-Cons with the next system, but they'll lose functionality. And the transition will be from the old Joy-Con to the new Joy-Con, which will be bigger. Because when I was reading complaints, it wasn't just about stick drift. It wasn't just about, durability, but it was also about the size. A lot of people, I think, pretty big hands, but I didn't really have a problem with the size of it, because I'm used to playing with a NES controller and all the controllers throughout history of Nintendo products, and I don't think it's too small. Was when I did video years ago talking about the size of it, and I made a little styrofoam thing when all the rumors going around, because I totally, it clicked with me, it snapped with me, which is kind of funny because that's the Switch's sound effect when they do the logo is the snap, But anyways, it clicked in my head right away, and I was like, this is small, but compared to portable, the buttons and the controls and stuff like that, it's actually not much bigger or smaller. It's about the same size as like what a 3DS control scheme was at the time. So I didn't see that big of a deal with it, but it's not just about what I see. It's going to be what Nintendo's doing. And maybe they're taking into account there was a lot of complaints about the size of it. So here we go with size also increased for the Joy-Cons to match and fit with the screen. Now what this means is that you probably will not be able to use the old Joy-Cons in the portable configuration like this. Now, again, the way that I got this set up, you might be able to use the old Joy-Cons for backwards compatibility and or for some of the games on the next Switch. But this is how this is. It's going to be bigger Joy-Cons. Now let's talk about size comparison between the new Switch and the old Switch. I don't like some of those, like Steam Deck and stuff like that. The controls, the sides, they just look so goofy. Now, there's been one argument out there by a couple of sources that say that the portable aspect of it won't even have Joy-Cons, or that they'll completely get rid of Joy-Cons altogether. I think that that's really bad. And they're gonna say, oh, size, durability. I don't even use the Joy-Cons. I use a Pro controller. Well, there's some people that don't. And they would have to pack in, if it's going to be a quote unquote Switch, or like the Switch in form factor, or in the hybrid type sense, where it's going to hook up to your television and also be a portable. Okay, if the controls are built into it, then you're going to have to pack in another controller in with it. That's going to add extra cost. And then what about stick drift again, or any other problems with the buttons, or whatever? If it's attached to the system, it's going to be like the older portables where, you're going to have it repaired every once in a while, especially with extended or a lot of use or whatever. That's just anything, of course. But the ideas that I'm going to suggest in this video are going to go beyond that, and not even, because this is what Nintendo doesn't want to acknowledge, because then if they acknowledge, the lawsuits are just going to flood in even that much more. If they acknowledge that they had built-in breakability with stick drift, or if they acknowledge that stick drift even exists, even if they themselves quote or say stick drift, then they're basically admitting that there's a problem. Now, should they admit it? Yes, but legally, they want to avoid admitting that mistake altogether. And it's an overblown mistake, in my opinion. I use mine all the time, and yes, I've had stick drift, but I've opened mine up, I've cleaned mine out, but I'm not the atypical person, because I work in a game store and I actually repair stuff, and it's not that big of a deal to me. But I can see how it could be a bigger deal to a lot of other people, which is why it's kind of blown out of proportion, especially with how some people treat their stuff. But blah, blah, blah. The suggestions that I'm going to have in this video are going to deal with that. And I'm not just talking about, let's put Hall effect sensors in there, because don't get me wrong, that's a good idea. But repairs are still going to have to happen with or without that, And if it's all contained in one unit, which you'll see later, it's going to be in pieces. I'll show you. But here's a size comparison between the two. And again, one of the arguments out there is that they won't even have Joy-Cons anymore. I don't like Joy-Cons, so they won't have Joy-Cons, is basically the mantra that is being spit out there. And I don't like that, because, there's lots of mantras out there about Nintendo that are basically not true, but because everybody keeps repeating them or regurgitating them, they think that they're a unique position or a unique argument, but they're not, because they're just regurgitating what other people are saying. I think the Joy-Cons are a great idea, because you can use them separately. You can use them tabletop mode. I know that's not a big mode for a lot of people. You could use them as a portable, and you can use them while it's docked. I mean, it's just brilliant. And I think that there needs to be changes made to upgrade or improve the Joy-Cons, and that's what I'm talking about in this video. But I don't think that they should just get rid of them outright. I don't see that. That's one of the aspects of this system that makes it unique to the portable PCs and the Steam Decks and crap like that out there. And people have embraced it. It's just, they want improvements. They want it to be bigger. They want to have less problems. They want the rails to be better. And that's what we're going to deal with. Because recently, we found HS codes for customs. Now, there was 8 of these made. I don't know if these were for test models or whatever. And I don't know what all the rest of this means over here, because I'm not good at looking up HS codes. But I saw the measurements in somebody else's thing, and I typed them in, and I found them. This is the left Joy-Con and the right Joy-Con for a future system, because these measurements are way bigger. Well, not like gigantic, but they're bigger. as compared to here, to this. So, so they're bigger, they're wider, they're thicker, and they're taller. So length, width, and height, they're bigger. And there's a left one and a right one. They're separate controllers, as it says. And this doesn't necessarily mean that this is this was physically made. You could tell because it's a customs report that says, hey, these were made in Vietnam and they were shipped back to Japan. So blah, blah, blah. And here is the size comparison. So here's a Wii remote on the bottom. It's 148 by 36 by 31 in millimeters. And then the regular Joy-Cons on the top here, and it's 102 by 36 by 14 millimeters. So it's very thin. But then here's what the suggested new Joy-Con would be. It's going to be longer, 115. It's going to be wider than even the Wii Remote, which is 36. This new one would be 40. And it's going to be thicker, not as thick as a Wii Remote, because that took AA batteries and, they made it thicker. And it's even thicker if you put the rubber jacket on it, or condom, or whatever you want to call it. But this is over 10 millimeters thicker than the current Joy-Con. Now, the current Joy-Con is flat throughout. Now, this doesn't account for the extremities, which is the stick sticking out, and on the top and on the back of it. There's there's overhang on the top for the button, the shoulder buttons, the Z, R, and the R buttons. There's a little bit of a overhang. It doesn't count those in the measurements that I've seen. So if you count those, then it's going to be bigger, of course, but it's not. The body of the Joy-Con itself and of this newer Joy-Con, these are the measurements for it. And I think it's going to be more like rounded, maybe a rubber grip, maybe some kind of contoured shape on the bottom of it, to give it kind of more like of a handle feel. And I don't think that the whole body of the Switch, like the screen and the actual system itself that these Joy-Cons attach to, I don't think they will be 25 millimeters thick. That's kind of thick. I think that they will be maybe thicker than the current Switch, of course, to fit more stuff in there. And that's a whole other point about having an 8-inch screen so that they can have more real estate on the inside of the system for a bigger battery, more space for the motherboard, the chipset, the system on a chip, So that's a whole other thing to talk about too. But we're just talking about the Joy-Cons right now, and I think it's going to be in between the size, not as long as a Wii Remote, of course, but a little bit wider than the Wii Remote, and that would allow for either bigger controls or more controls. And also for my idea of modular controls, where you could change the controls in and out. We'll go into that more here in a moment. But I was talking about the thickness of it. I think it'll be like kind of like a grip. And this will also be important because of the button positions that I'm going to suggest too. You're going to need more of a grip on the back of these as you're holding it as a portable. Maybe the grips are even movable, that's just one idea that I have kicking around in my head, that like as you're holding it as a portable or as two controllers together in a grip, the handles kind of move outward to make it more like a controller when they're both together, or more modern controller, or a pro controller, or however you want to word it. But yeah, so they could be bigger controls that are on the face of the controller, or the Joy-Con, or the new Joy-Con, or it could be that they could fit more controls on there. Now that might make it too busy. And one of my ideas was that they were going to have 3 positions or just 2 positions. The 2 positions would have to be more centered, left and right, or the 3 positions would be, there's one when you're holding it in this position like this as a Joy-Con. One would be on the right, one would be in the center, and one would be on the left, of course. So here's a patent from a long time ago, and we're going to go through some patents now. Before the Switch came out, of course, we didn't see these until after the Switch came out, but this is one of the ideas that they had. They had ideas for changing the angle of the buttons. I'm not too sure why they were going for that. That would have been a little bit too many moving parts and problems, but that was one of the things that they had. That it was a rail, and then the controls could like go in on the top or whatever at an angle. I don't know. But this was intriguing. Now this looks like a button right here, but it could have been a slide pad, like a slide stick that the 3DS had that was flat. Or it could be just a stick, underneath the D-pad. And I want a D-pad on the next Joy-Con. I think a lot of people do. But whatever. So there's 3 positions here. There's a button position, the control position nearer towards the top, or on the left if you're holding it like a singular, and then a control in the middle. So, but I kicked around that idea a lot, and it looked a little bit too cluttered and too busy, maybe too confusing, and they don't want it to be confusing. The Wii Remote had 3 positions as well, kind of. Because they had the big A button underneath the D-pad and, then buttons on the other end, blah, blah, blah. And that's what this kind of looks like as a Wii Remote, but in Joy-Con form, a lot smaller. Then we're also going to talk about, I think, a big feature of this, even if the ideas that I have for modular controls or changeable controls don't happen, I think that this still will happen, and this is scroll wheels. Now, the nice thing about the controller being thicker is scroll wheels are going to be even more possible, because you need space for those wheels to move around inside the Joy-Con. So I think the L and R buttons will be replaced by clickable scroll wheels, and that the ZR and ZL buttons will be more of like pressure sensitive, or maybe even haptic type controls. I'm thinking more like GameCube analog buttons, but a lot of people have suggested, it should be like PlayStation 5's controllers where they're haptic or whatever. But Nintendo has had patents for that before in the past. We're not getting into that too much because you can't see it from the angles that I'm going to show the pictures to you. But there's scroll wheels. There's a scroll wheel in there, and it shows how they're positioning it as a shoulder button on a controller. Now this was back in the gamepad days, or pre-Switch or pre-NX days, in these patents. So, and then here's another one that's back then too, is the modular controls, as I was talking about before. Now, I've kicked around this idea before on previous videos, and when I've talked about this in general. But yeah, these have them sliding in, and then there's 2 connection points here and here on the top and bottom of each of the modular controls. You could probably switch them to make them upside down. My suggestion is that the connection point is going to be on the bottom, and that it can be switched in any position and then locked in place, and that it's going to be dropped in top down instead of sliding in from the side or from the inside. So they show here, here's 4 different positions on a controller, kind of like how there are on the Switch currently, but they're more lowered and centered, which, I think people's thumbs will be able to handle it, especially with a grip or a handle in the back of the Joy-Cons. This looks more like, again, like a Wii U gamepad, but slides in and out. right? So that you can change the controls. And then they even kicked around the idea of doing it with every single position of the controls. So you could change all of them, you know. And here you can see that the buttons are edge to edge. So these little individual pieces, they're not going to be restricted. It's not that they have to be so small to fit on the face of the top of the modular piece, but that the buttons could actually be edge to edge. So that'll be important for later. And then recently they patented, now this is a more recent patent that was found in Europe, that they patented the GameCube controller. Immediately, everybody was like, oh, they're adding GameCube to the, this is going to be like a GameCube controller that they're going to have for the Switch Online, or for NSO, or for, you know, an expansion pass, you know, to where you could buy and play GameCube games. There's a possibility of that in the future. I'm not saying that there isn't a possibility of that. But it's also just mainly about the controls in general. And what if this is one of the modular pieces? And they're patenting that now. You know, so that's just an idea. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's for some kind of, you know, but Nintendo repatents stuff all the time, including stuff that you wouldn't think that they would, but they do it just to reword it. A lot of lawyers speak. They've dealt with lots of lawsuits throughout their entire history. And that's why you have patents. That's why you deal with things like this. So then there was this concept out here. Now, I hated the concept when I first saw it. I was like, why would they have sliding? What is the point of this? And as you can see, they're slid up, these Joy-Cons inside of handles type thing. This is not what I'm suggesting, but I could see what the person who made this was going for. Because, you know, when you take them out and use them as individual controllers, you can slide them down, you know, and that would be nice in the case of holding it sideways as one individual controller, because the controls are more centered. See how they're here and here, as opposed to being all the way at the top, like here and here. So when you slide it down, it's more centered, and that's what I'm suggesting for mine. Not sliding it, but that they were going to move the controls down a little bit and you know, put a handle on the back so you can hold it better. Another idea is that the buttons could change colors. Now, we know through lots of videos out there that a couple months ago when they showed off newer games, that people noticed that the color scheme was like Super Nintendo or Super Famicom. You know, the blue, green, red, yellow buttons. And one idea is that these buttons will be that color scheme to differentiate this Joy-Con from the old Joy-Con, you know, let alone the fact that it's going to be bigger and that it might have more features like a scroll wheel and all this other stuff. But the color itself was going to differentiate, hey, the old Joy-Cons have, you know, just gray buttons or dark buttons, and these have color buttons. Woo, it's new, it's, you know. But then my problem with it was, are they going to have it to where, like on the Xbox 360, they had a D-pad that could be raised or lowered just by spinning it? Are they going to make it to where you could spin the buttons? Because if you hold the controller sideways, the Joy-Con sideways as a solo controller by itself, the buttons are going to be in the wrong position. Now that's true in the case of the Joy-Cons that we have today. The lettering on them, you know, A, B, X, Y, is sideways when you hold the controller sideways, you know. So that's kind of a personal annoyance of mine. I'm very organized in my thoughts and in my head, and it's kind of like, you know, you can call it OCD, you can call it whatever, but aesthetically, I don't think it looks right. So Could they have color changing buttons, like little LEDs on the tips of the buttons? I think that'd be a little bit too expensive. Could the buttons twist, like I was saying before, and could they twist and, change the position of them depending on what orientation you have them in, horizontal or vertical, attached to the switch, or as a more like pro controller in a grip, or as an individual controller, turn it sideways. Or could they have overlays? That's what this is. These are overlays. They lay on top of the buttons. They still function as the buttons, but they can turn it more into a D-pad, or change the color of the buttons, or, whatever. They could even change the size of the buttons. Now, overlays are completely possible. I just have this in here as an idea in case they don't have modular pieces that swap in and out, or that can be changed in position, blah, blah, blah. Because I think this would be a better solution than having like little color changing LEDs on the inside of each button. That would be probably too expensive, and that might be a problem. It'd be cool, but maybe someday in the future. But as it is right now, I don't think that that's something that they would go for. Certainly something that is very Nintendo-esque, but what are the benefits to cost measures? I think it's not good enough for them to be able to do. So, and I was talking before about how in recent game trailers they showed all of these color schemes, the Y button being green, the A button being red, and even third-party games have had this. And I couldn't find a picture as I was making this, but this is a picture probably from somebody's YouTube video of explaining that and going, oh, that's going to be Switch 2, blah, 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 right? So here's my concept. As you can see, the controls are lowered. So instead of them being up here and here, they're lowered a little bit down and more centered. And you have the scroll wheel here, and the color buttons, and then there's this eject button here to allow you to, it's going to be like a switch that you pull down to eject those pieces, because these are little modular pieces right here that you could change the positions of, and that you could change your controls. Now, here's a problem that could be foreseen with this. If you don't have the right controls in there, it's not going to work, of course, depending on the game. Some games are going to require, more or less of something, or, different kinds of controls. A D-pad can't replace a stick. But Nintendo has been good about, ever since like the GameCube days, of making it to where some games, like Animal Crossing, you could play games with the stick or the D-pad, or, but more complicated games like Metroid, the D-pad is completely separate and does separate things than the stick does. So that could be a potential problem, but, this is also a money-making thing for them too. You could sell new Joy-Cons with these different pieces in them, and then you could also sell these new modular pieces separately. So like if your stick goes bad, they don't have to admit that, oh, it's just worn out, or if they have a different type of stick, they could convince you or have you buy a new stick. Wouldn't that be a lot better than having to take it apart all the time, or clean it, or send it off to get repaired, or send it back to Nintendo and, blah, blah, blah. Some people would say, oh, no, that's worse. And some people would say, oh, that's, it's kind of convenient because I'm not out a controller or out a Joy-Con for however long it takes to get it repaired. I can just take out the old piece that's not working and put in a new one. Or take out the old piece, clean it, and see if that helps it, So here, Joy-Cons individually in different formats. You got a Super Nintendo format, and as you can see, the buttons change position to more of the horizontal position here. But then when you have it vertically on the side of the Switch or in a grip, as a more, like Pro controller, you could turn the buttons the other way to where they match where they're supposed to be. And here's more of a Nintendo 64 kind of scheme, and here's the edge-to-edge buttons that I was talking about before with 6 buttons. This would be great for fighting games, or to really have the feel of a Nintendo 64 controller. Now, I know a lot of people like the actual Nintendo 64 controller, and that you could buy those, the ones from the Nintendo Switch Online for Super and for NES and now 64, and then maybe in the future a GameCube one. But this is an alternative, maybe even a cheaper one, in-store alternative where you can just buy the buttons and then swap them out. And then here's the GameCube button layout. This would be great. And then here's the sticks are gauged, This one's more of a rounded gauge for GameCube, and this one's more of a higher, tighter gauge for the longer stick of the Nintendo 64. But you could have all different types of pieces that can go in here. And let me give you some examples. You could have a C-stick. You could have a little screen like a VMU kind of drop in there. You could have a trackball or a jog wheel of some type. You could have a dial that spins, that you can move, that like kind of like the old Atari like paddles or whatever. You could have the vitality sensor, there could be a touch pad there, or even a touch screen or something. There could be the flat slide stick that the 3DS had, if you like that. But one of my own personal ideas is a sensory feel button. You know how they have those Braille machines where you can run the machine or the little handheld device over words, and then it reinterprets those words into these felt sensors that bump up and make it into Braille, right? Well, they could do that with video games, And I've kicked around this idea before. I think I've even presented in previous videos where, like let's say the screen goes dark, you're in the dark, you can hear things, but you got to look around in 3D space with a 3D controller like the Joy-Con, like a Wii remote motion controls. But the button will tell you where you feel a light switch or a match to light a lantern or something. Or it could feel like a spider crawling over your thumb or something like that, or something trying to grab it or, touch it back or whatever. So that's one of my ideas, is a sensory feel button. And any idea that they would have, the great thing about all of this is that they could literally take out the controls that are currently in there and pop in whatever controls they want, in the future. It's a very versatile way to do controls. And again, how this works is, in this top one here where there's no controls in there, there's going to be little connection points in the bottom. So no matter what position it is in, for changing button positions, you just plop it in there, and then you push the button back up, the eject button back up into place to lock it in place. Now, would this be held together by magnets or some kind of rubber thing that tightens around it, or some kind of plastic piece that like just holds it in place? I'm not too sure exactly. I think a combination of rubber and plastic holding it on the sides, and then a magnet where it connects on the bottom would be best, And Nintendo has definitely worked with magnetic connections before. Maybe some kind of induction connection to where it's not even a physical like cartridge or like plug, like how the nunchuck used to plug into the Wii remote. Maybe it's not that kind of a physical connection, but more of like a magnetic connection. They thought about this before with instead of rails that would go into the side of the Switch, it'd be magnets. But they didn't think that it was going to hold very well, and I would agree with that. I don't think magnets, over time, magnets kind of like lose their magnetism. So putting too much pressure on them is going to make it lose it more. But as far as like an induction type connection, especially if it's just laying in there, no like abuse that's going to constantly be pulling it apart, like as if you were attaching a Joy-Con to the side of the system. That, you know, if they kicked around that idea, they could do it with this. Excuse me. So that is my idea for how the next Switch would work. Moving some controls around, adding handles to the back of them, adding this modular controls to where you can change them. The L and R and ZL and ZR buttons would be replaced by more like GameCube triggers, and scroll wheels, and it would be overall thicker, so it would feel more substantial and be bigger, so it would fix the complaints with a lot of people that have that. Now you would have to buy all new grips and all new accessories. Would something like this be able to attach to the ring, what do you call it? The Ring Fit accessory? No, they might have to make an adapter for some of these things to make them fit in older devices, or they might have to make a new Ring Fit thing, or you would have to use your old Joy-Cons. Again, my idea suggests that you could still, for backwards compatibility sake and or for multiplayer in certain games, you could still use your old Joy-Cons. So it's not like you have to rebuy, you know, if you had like enough for 8 people to play, it's not like you instantly have to, when this new one comes out, have 8 new, you know, controllers. But, you know, to each their own, I guess, when it comes to that kind of thing. But you could still use your old one for some multiplayer games. Like Mario Kart, I don't think would need super advanced controls. You know, you could use the old Switch Joy-Con with that. So, and same thing like with Smash Brothers, you would probably I use the actual GameCube plugged into one of those adapters that go through USB, so I can have up to 8 GameCube players, since I have 8 GameCube controllers, because I'm crazy like that. But, you know, you could do this, you know, or you could use your old Joy-Con or what have you. So this is where I come to the name of the system, which I was just going to talk about the Joy-Cons, but we're going to talk about the name of the system. I'm going to call it Super Nintendo Switch, because again, the idea is the Super Famicom or Super Nintendo button control scheme is really going to show its differentiating point. I don't even know if that's a word. Between it and the old Switch, you know, not just the size, not just the modular controls or whatever, because they may or may not have that. But I do think that they are going to change the color scheme of the buttons. And so here it is, Super Nintendo Switch. Now, my idea is, and I probably should have made this like an animated GIF of it or something, where it would show all these different types of controls, a D-pad, a stick, the GameCube button layout, the 64 button layout, the Super Nintendo button layout. It would end with the Super Nintendo one with these different colors because it's colorful. And then, boom, Super Nintendo Switch. And this goes with the Super Nintendo lands that they're making, or Super Nintendo World theme parks that they're making, and some other Super Nintendo type ideas. It'll kick around nostalgia. It'll show, hey, this is the next Switch, not just aesthetically, it's bigger and with different color buttons, but also that it's the Super Switch, you know. And then there's two-tone color here too, so that, like, you know, oftentimes when they have those logos at the bottom of a like this game is coming out for PlayStation and Xbox and Switch, you know, well, this would be the replacement one. So So thanks for watching. Sorry this was long-winded. I'm going to go backwards through all these pictures again so that you can see my ideas. And again, thanks for watching. Give me some thoughts on this. I know that there's a lot of other news that is going on right now with Nintendo, but I just wanted to focus on this for right now. So thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed.